Hi, I've been waiting for you. We have another segment of the first angel's message, the history of it. This is a reading of certain excerpts from pages 124 to page 163 from Life Incidents by James White. It is very important, critically important, that you get a copy of this book so that you own it. This book comes from, this edition, I should say, comes from the Adventist Book Center. It's less than $30, and it's critically important that you have this information so that you understand the true history of the Advent message. We're going to cover the high points out of this book, and then we'll carry on from there into as we go on. We left off with page 120 in our last video, and this begins now the section on the rise and progress of Adventism, which is on 120, but we are skipping ahead, and as we said, picking the high points here. One of the major points that happened was the prediction of Josiah Litch based on the year for a day prophetic time interpretation of prophecy. And so this is from page 124. It says that Josiah Litch published a work of 204 pages entitled The Probability of the Second Coming of Christ about the year 1843. It was in this work that the calculation on the fall of the Ottoman supremacy on the 11th of August 1840 was first given to the world. And then we're skipping ahead again a few pages and breaking in to the other things that James White has said, which are all important, but these are the high points. It states here on page 128, as the spring opened and the summer came, the entire community were excited and expectation on tiptoe in reference to the 11th of August and its anticipated events, the fall of the Ottoman Empire, and so forth. Many were the predictions that when that day should have passed by, as it certainly would do, without the event being realized, then the spell would be broken and Adventism would die. But the time came, and it must be confessed it was for a few weeks a time of trial to many. Yet he who tempers the wind to the shorn lamb had compassion on his little ones and did not suffer them to be tempted above what they were able to bear. And few, very few, even under that trial, shrank from their faith. The time came and passed by, and as a matter of course, the distance from Constantinople could not be passed without consuming some considerable period of time. But when the fact did reach us, it was found that on the very day anticipated, the 11th of August, a transfer was made of the supremacy of that empire from Mohammedan hands. This fact entirely discomfited the hosts of the enemy. The cause again revived and careered on its way with still greater power than ever before. Now I want to point out an item for your understanding. When you go on the internet to look up this date and this information, there is a lot of information on Wikipedia, designed by Satan to put down and hide any proof that you might find in Wikipedia for the facts that James White states. And this is the importance of this book. James White lived through this experience. He saw the news that came through, and it was proven that August the 11th, 1840 was the date of the fulfillment of a prophecy that was calculated and predicted 2 years in advance of this date. Critically important information to confirm your faith in this message. We move ahead now to page 153, and the subheading here is the Exeter Camp Meeting. It was in the month of August 1844 that the memorable Second Advent Camp Meeting was held at Exeter, New Hampshire. Now, it should be noted here that we made a jump from 1840 to 1844, but 1843 was the actual date of just the whole year that William Miller had identified. So keep that in mind as we go through this. This meeting, the Exeter Camp Meeting, was large. It was the occasion of a general rally from all parts of New England, and many were present from other states and from the Canadas. There were many tents upon the grounds, some of them resembling houses of worship in size and shape, more than the small tents usually seen upon Methodist campgrounds. These furnished ample accommodations for the thousands of believers present. There was a general agreement with all Adventists at that time that the special providence of God had directed the Advent movement, but the farthest point to which the Jewish year could be extended, reaching from March 1843 to March 1844, had passed, and believers were left in a state of suspense and uncertainty, evidently not enjoying all the inspiring influence of the Advent hope and faith they felt under the proclamation of definite time. Now, there are other things mentioned in here, and it's important to understand those. But we're breaking in again to the middle of this Exeter Camp Meeting, and we're on page 159. Several spoke from the stand, but they failed to move the people. This is because the understanding was just coming at this point. That's where we're breaking in. God evidently had a special message for that people to be attended with his signal blessing. Men of ability spoke of the great lines of prophecy which proved that the advent of Christ was the next great event, and of the signs that the event was at the door. But this was as familiar to that crowd of intelligent believers as the alphabet. Just then, as one was speaking with but little force and interest, and the people were becoming weary of being told in a dull, prosy style what they already knew, a middle-aged, modest-appearing lady arose in the center of the audience, and in a calm manner, and with a clear, strong, yet pleasant voice, addressed the speaker as followed. "It is too late, brother. It is too late to spend our time upon these truths with which we are familiar, and which have been blessed to us in the past, and have served their purpose and their time." The brother sat down, and the lady continued, while all eyes were fastened upon her. It's too late, brethren, to spend precious time as we have since this camp meeting commenced. Time is short. The Lord has servants here who have meat in due season for his household. Let them speak. Let the people hear them. "Behold, the bridegroom cometh. Go ye out to meet him." This testimony seemed electrified and was responded to by choked utterances of amen from every part of that vast encampment. Many were in tears. What former speakers had said was forgotten, and the spirit of fanaticism which an hour before lay upon the burdened feelings of the brethren and sisters like a ponderous leaden weight was also forgotten. The attention paid to those in fanaticism and the opposition they were able to call out was just the coveted fuel to feed the unhallowed flame, and they were destined to triumph unless the attention of the people could be fastened in another direction. This done, and their power was broken. By the request of many brethren, the next morning the arguments were given from the stand which formed the basis of the 10th day of the 7th month movement. The speaker was solemn and dignified, and showed to the entire satisfaction of that vast body of intelligent believers. 1. That all the evidences which had been relied upon as proof that the 2300 prophetic days of Daniel 8 would end in the year 1843 proved that they would terminate in 1844. The entire body of believers had been united, agreeing with William Miller that the 2300 days dated from the going forth of the commandment to build, to restore, and to build Jerusalem in BC 457. This point settled, the figures 1843 were readily found. But the speaker showed an error in this calculation. He stated that it would require 457 full years before Christ and 1843 full years after Christ to make 2,300 full years, so that if the 2,300 years commenced with the first day of 457, they would reach to the first day of 1844. 2. That the prophetic period did not commence with the year 457 in the spring, but in the autumn of that year. His reasons were, A, that as the 70 prophetic weeks are the first 490 years of the 2300-year prophecy, and as the first 7 weeks of the 70 mark the time of the work of restoring and building Jerusalem in troublous times, the great period must commence with the commencement of the work of restoring and building, which did not commence in the spring on the first month when Ezra started from Babylon, but after he had reached Jerusalem in the autumn, probably on the 7th month. For upon the first day of the first month began he to go up from Babylon, and on the first day of the 5th month came he to Jerusalem. That's Ezra 7:9. This would give more than 2 months for the necessary preparations for the work of restoring and building to commence on the 7th month, immediately after the great Day of Atonement. B, that the words of the angel to the prophet Daniel in the midst of the week He shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, mean that in the middle of the last week of the 70, Christ should be crucified. And as he was crucified in the spring, that prophetic week of 7 years must commence and close in the fall. Consequently, the 70 weeks commenced and closed in the fall, and therefore the 2300 days terminate in the fall. 3. The speaker then introduced the arguments drawn from the types of the law of Moses, which point to Christ, to prove that the second advent of him who was then our high priest would take place in the autumn, even on the 10th day of the 7th Jewish month. He reasoned that as the spring types pointing to the great events connected with the first advent of Christ were fulfilled, not only as to their nature and order, but as to time, so would the autumnal types, pointing to the second advent, be fulfilled as to time. See Leviticus 23. The slaying of the Passover lamb was a type of the crucifixion of Christ. Paul says, Christ, our Passover, is sacrificed for us. 1 Corinthians 5:7. The sheaf of the first fruits of the harvest, which was waved before the Lord, was typical of the resurrection of Christ. Paul again says, in speaking of the resurrection of the Lord and all his people, Christ, the first fruits, afterward they that are Christ at his coming. As this sheaf was like the grain in all the wide harvest field, only that it was the first ripe grain, so Christ arose from the dead, a sample of all the just to be raised at his second coming. Then all the saints will have glorious bodies like that of their divine Lord. Philippians 3:21. The new meat offering was a type of the descent of the Holy Spirit on the day of Pentecost. The speaker stated that Christ was offered a sacrifice for sinners on the 14th day of the first Jewish month, the very day and month on which the Passover lamb had been slain for 16 long centuries. That he was raised from the dead, a sample of all the resurrected just on the very day of the month upon which the earliest ripe grain was waved before the Lord, and that the descent of the Holy Spirit on the day of Pentecost, meaning 50, was on the day of the month in which the new meat offering was presented unto the Lord. That new meat offering was 50 days from the presentation of the wave sheaf. The descent of the Holy Spirit upon the waiting disciples was on the day of Pentecost, or 50th day from the resurrection of their divine Lord. And therefore, as the high priest on the 10th day of the 7th month, on the great Day of Atonement, came out of the sanctuary and blessed the people, so Christ, our great high priest, would, upon the same day of the same month, come from heaven to bless his waiting people with immortality. The conclusion seemed irresistible, and what gave it still greater force was the harmony of this position with the proofs presented that the prophetic period of 2300 days would terminate in the fall. And we close our reading on that note and invite your study of these things. In the description below, you will find links to this book, where to purchase it, as well as several other items that are critically important to your faith. Please look in the description and verify that you have the correct editions of these very important books. God bless your study.